demonstration of something I've built recently that's useful for me, and hopefully it's useful for you too. There's certainly more applications than what I'm using it for. It's also a good way to learn about webhooks in Integromat and web responses and things like that. So let me just give you the scenario. So when I create automations for my clients and for myself, before I create the automation, I add them into my Airtable database as documentation. So I give it a title, what is this automation? I give it a good description of what the automation does, which client it's for, which application it's for, which application it's built in, various bits of information. So this is the form here, and if we just have a look at the form, so we have the title here. So what is this automation? So in this case, send email when inquiry is added. Choose the client, choose the application you're building the automation in. A good description in here is always good practice, and then the status of the automation that you're building, and then maybe the application. So the point is, this information is entered into Airtable for documentation purposes, and also when it does that, it will generate an auto ID. So Airtable, one of the fields in Airtable is an auto ID field, and it will generate an auto ID, so that I have unique IDs for all the automations I build. Then when I create the automation for the client, I use that information. So that is good for troubleshooting later on. If you're getting error messages sent to you, they'll have the title usually of the automation. You can then go into your database and find out what that automation does. The more automations you build, the harder it gets to track them. And so, you thank yourself later for doing such a thing. Fill this in, I click submit, and then what happens with Airtable when you submit the form, you can redirect to a website, or you can just say thank you for submitting the form. What I want is that information back. I want the auto ID that's given, and I want the information on the screen that I just entered. So to do that, we can use Integromat, and that's what we're going to look at in a minute. So before we do that, if we look at the form, so this is the form we've just looked at, and down at the bottom here we have redirect, and what we're actually doing is redirecting to a webhook in Integromat, and we're passing the record ID. So this is just the syntax used to pass a record ID to Integromat. Okay, so let's go to Integromat and look at that. So this is the automation, very simple, and you can see at the top here, this is me practicing what I preach here. This automation has its own unique ID and the name, and I can go into that database and find information about it. So all we're doing is we're passing information to this custom webhook here. So it's as simple as going into webhooks, add it, and it will give you a unique URL. So we add that in there. When we fill the form in, Airtable is going to pass that information to this webhook, and it's going to pass the record ID that was just entered via the form. So all we need to do then is go into Airtable. So we're just using a search Airtable module here, and we're telling it to go and find the record ID in the table. That's all we're doing there. And then the last one is the response. So then we'll send the response back to the client with the information we want. So if we just open that one, so the response is just 200, and then all we've got in here is some HTML. So we're just building a basic page that we're going to display, and it's also going to contain the automation name and the description as well. So if we just click OK, you'll see exactly how this works and what I mean. So let's go back to the form we filled in here, and we're just going to click submit. So very quickly, this is going to redirect. The annoying bit is this with Airtable here. It just waits a few seconds before it redirects you, but then it will give you this. So this is the HTML that we just looked at, and it's going to give me what I want, so the automation number and the description as well. And then I've just got a little add over, so I can add another form there. So just to go back and look what happened then, let's just have a look at the history here. Okay, we can see what happened here. If we click on details, we can see here that it received a redirect, and in that redirect it had a record ID, and then we came in here, Airtable searched for that record ID, and it found all the information, and then we just redirected to, well, we just passed the status back to the page to say here's all the information. So that's how you can use it for that purpose. There's obviously, you know, other applications for this, but this is a neat little way to just test setting up webhooks, web responses, and that kind of thing. Yeah, I hope that's useful for you, and yeah, thanks for listening.